Hi, I'm Karl Taylor from visualeducation.com, and today we're going to be looking at my 5 top tips for portrait photography. Tip number 1, make your subject comfortable. Now that may sound very simplified, but it really is important. If you imagine that you're the portrait subject coming into your studio to be photographed, it can actually be quite daunting for the subject, for the person being photographed. So what I like to do is I really like to engage the subject, make them feel comfortable right from the off. So this is sort of interpersonal skills, so being friendly with them, making them feel welcome, making them feel comfortable, taking your time, having conversation with them so that you put them at ease. Because it's very difficult to photograph a nervous subject really well. You want to get the best characteristics out of your subject. So by making them feel at ease and comfortable in your studio, you're going to get much better results to start with. The next part of the process is to actually make them feel part of that creative process. So if you've got a shoot idea in mind, a particular style for the portrait, then talk that through with your subject in advance. Show them some examples, say that, we're going for this particular mood or that particular mood, or I'm going to try this type of lighting because I want to give it this particular look. Or you've got this beautiful sort of feature or style or look that we're going to amplify and show off to its best. So by really engaging them in that creative process, you make them feel that they're part of the shoot. Also, another great tip in terms of making your subject feel comfortable is don't waste their time. If you're going to do lots and lots of lighting tests to figure out what you want to do, whether you're going to put the light here, there, backlight, this, that and the other, don't waste all of the subject's time doing that testing. You can actually simplify things and make the subject feel a lot more comfortable by getting a lot of your testing out of the way before they even arrive, or let the subject sit in comfort in your waiting area or a chair somewhere while you test the lighting on a mannequin. I often use mannequins or assistants for my tests. That way I can build my lighting up, work it out, get all the ratios figured out, all of the exposures figured out, and then I can bring the subject in when the lighting is ready, and it will then only need a few tweaks before we can get stuck into the actual main shooting. But if you've got to do all of your testing on your main portrait subject, that can waste quite a lot of time, and it can actually make the subject feel uncomfortable by the time you're ready to do the shoot. So testing on a mannequin can be really useful. Tip number 2, shooting angle. Now what does that mean? Well, are you shooting from a high angle? Are you shooting from a low angle? Or are you shooting from eye level? And more importantly, why are you shooting from that angle? You really need to think about what you're trying to say with the portrait, what the story is. And different shooting angles create different moods and different feelings. For example, sometimes for more powerful fashion or beauty images, I'll decide to shoot from a lower angle to make the subject look more imposing and more powerful. If we want a really good connection on a more close-up portrait study, then I'll often shoot just slightly elevated above eye level so that I'm looking down at the subject and the subject has to then look up slightly at the camera, and this opens the eyes a little bit as well and creates a slightly brighter look. Sometimes you want a more concentrated, determined look right into the eyes of the subject, especially in male portraits, and that often works really well from an exact eye level. So deciding on your shooting angle is really important. Now it doesn't mean that you have to stick to it. Of course you can vary your shooting angle throughout the shoot, but it's a good idea to understand why you're doing it and what the results will achieve. Tip number 3, decide on the mood and emotion first. Try not to have your subject arrive in the studio for you to then just be experimenting on a million different things, because you might not get as far as you like with the shoot. It's a really good idea to understand either what your subject wants and the mood that they require, or what you require. So use mood boards, build a folder of images that show the style that you like to achieve. Is it a more dark, ominous lighting? Is it a more sexy lighting? Or is it a bright, airy lighting? Or is it more of a textured side lighting on an old, craggy face? Decide what it is that you want to achieve with the mood and the emotion of your pictures. Figure out that mood in advance, and then that will dictate the style of the lighting, the choice of background, the choice of clothes, etc., so that you can build the shoot to match that mood and style. By having that mood and style in your mind before you start the process, and by creating mood boards of images that give you ideas along that style, can really help you with your shoot and help it flow and help achieve better results. Tip number 4, choose the aperture first. Nearly every shoot that I undertake, whether it's fashion, beauty, portrait, product, whatever it is, I've already decided the aperture that I'm going to use in the camera lens. And the reason for this is that it's a creative decision based on depth of field. I know, for example, that if I'm doing a beauty headshot, that I'm going to want most of that makeup, or nearly all of that face sharp, all the way from the front of the nose to the ears. So I'm very likely going to be shooting at f/16. If I'm doing a softer looking portrait, I may be opting for a shallower depth of field, maybe f5.6 or f4. But I've made that decision in advance. I'm not moving my camera settings to match the lighting, I'm moving the lighting to match my camera settings. And this is really, really important, because the aperture is the deciding factor in depth of field. Now, of course, if we're working in a studio environment with controlled lighting, then we can just simply adjust the power of the lighting up or down like a volume control to decide where the lighting needs to be to match that aperture. If you start adjusting the aperture to suit the lighting, then you're losing a creative part of the process, because you've now deviated from the depth of field that you already thought about. Again, in studio photography, when we're using flash, studio flash, the shutter speed is already dictated as well, because we just need the flash sync speed that's going to cut out the ambient light. So that's dictated already, and you dictate your aperture based on depth of field reasons, and then you simply adjust your lighting up and down to match until you arrive where you need to be. Now, of course, if you're working outdoors with natural lighting, it's a little bit more difficult, because we can't turn the sun power up or down. But what we can do is still decide the aperture that we want to shoot at. And we can then adjust the shutter speed, of course, to match, because we're not having to synchronize with flash. Or we can apply neutral density filters on the front of the lens if we need to cut further light out. So always decide the aperture first, and then you've got creative control over depth of field. Tip number 5, don't overcomplicate it. Now, again, this may sound very simple, but I see many photographers on portrait shoots overcomplicating it. They think that the more they throw at it, the more lights, the more props, the more elaborate sets, the more elaborate backgrounds, the more elaborate costumes and clothes, they think it will make the shot better or save the shot. But actually, the opposite is often true. Some of the most effective portraits and striking portraits are often the simplest ones, sometimes just lit by one key light and one background light, and you really reveal the character of the subject. You have to remember what portrait photography is actually about. It's about revealing the character of the subject, telling the story of the subject. And if you overcomplicate a shoot with too many distractions, too many props, too many costumes, you're basically allowing the supporting cast to take over from the hero, which is the main subject. So be very considerate about your choices with clothing. Think about neutrality sometimes in what the subject will be wearing, so that it's the subject that sort of shines in the image and not the costume or the outfit. Now, of course, this is different in fashion photography because the opposite is true. We're trying to make the clothes, the textures and the fabrics be the key thing of the photograph, so that has to be taken into consideration. But in portraiture, it's somewhat different. Try to stay away from crazy backgrounds that are just going to overcomplicate the shot or make it too busy. Simplifying your shoot and focusing on the beauty of the subject and the simplicity of your lighting is what's key to creating great portraits. Now, that doesn't mean to say that your lighting has to be completely simple. Sometimes on portraits I use 1 light, 2 lights, sometimes 5 or 6. It depends what I'm trying to show. It might be that I'm adding rim lighting, so I need a few lights from behind, I need a light on the background, and then I need another couple of little key spotlights on the subject. But it all goes down to that mood and emotion that I'm trying to convey, and that will dictate how many lights that I'm going to use. But always I'm conscious of not overcomplicating it, because at the end of the day, the success of the shot comes down to how long the viewer wants to look at the picture. If you present a picture that is full of distractions, full of overcomplicated items, then the viewer does not want to spend time looking at that picture. So do not overcomplicate it. So those are my 5 top tips for portrait photography. Now, if you'd like to see thousands of other examples, great tips for portrait photography, and lots of different lighting setups, then you can follow me at visualeducation.com, where I can demonstrate to you many different shoots with all different styles and all different types of lighting. Thanks for watching.